Thank you for coming out tonight. I know it's a little raw and started raining out there, but thank you for coming out tonight. So we have about a half an hour together. Mr. Milmo kind of said time frame wise. So, I mean, the mental side of sports, you could do a whole workshop, you could do a whole class, a semester class on it. But tonight I'm just going to sort of tell you a little bit about, share a little bit with you all what I've learned, both in my work with athletes and also just so you know my background. I'm a clinical and sports psychologist. So what does that mean? I work with everyone from adolescents to all the way up to people in their 80s. I work not just with athletes, but also with, as a clinical psychologist, with people around depression, anxiety, relationship issues, grief, bereavement. But a lot of the work that I do is with athletes, helping athletes to overcome mental blocks, challenges. A lot of athletes come to me because they feel stuck, they have the yips, they're dealing with performance anxiety. So that's kind of my own background. Just so you know, I let people know too that athletics and sports has always been an important part of my life. I was on played high school football in high school. I played club lacrosse in college. I played in a men's baseball league for several years in my early 40s, and I've been a lifelong golfer, and I still compete in Rhode Island Golf Association events. Why do I tell you that? Because I think in working with athletes, it's important that they know that I've been in the locker room before, that I know how stressful it can be to be an athlete. So that's part of my background, and while I work with people all different issues, my work with athletes is especially something I really enjoy. Having athletes come back to me and say, you know, the stuff we worked on really helped me to play better. I could perform at a higher level. That gives me a tremendous sense of meaning and purpose in my own work. So I'm really happy to be here tonight. I was so glad when Mr. Milmo invited me. So yeah, just in terms of, I actually have an office right here in Portsmouth. So I'm literally, my office is kind of across the cornfield, as it were, that's over here. So I'm pretty close. I wanted to let you know too that I was a high school, in a former life, I was a high school religion teacher at a Catholic school, so I did that for a year. So it's great to be back in the classroom, as it were, with high school students. So just to briefly kind of the goals for tonight. I know we don't have a long time together, but just to share some key thoughts and some skills that hopefully will be useful to you. That's my goal, is to kind of hit on some main points, some skills and things that you can take with you. And I know you guys have EIL, you all have EIL playoffs in the next few weeks, so hopefully this is timely and something will click too in that regard. So just to start, you all have a piece of paper. I'd like to just take a few minutes whenever I give a presentation, just so I'm not talking at you. It's really important for me to know what questions do you all bring, what questions do you have. Maybe if you want to we'll take a few minutes to write down as you come tonight things you're curious about, or maybe even challenges that you found on the playing field in terms of the mental side of things. So maybe we could just take a few minutes to jot those things down if you want to, and then as we get started. So I know some people are still writing a few things, but would anyone care to share what questions that they wrote down, or things they're curious about, or maybe even challenges that they sort of came to mind in terms of the mental side of the game, of dealing with sports? And if people aren't comfortable sharing, that's fine. But we will also go into, if you wanna hold your questions too, we'll have a time at the end, about 10 minutes to do some Q&A, so. Mr. Melmo.
Dr. Zeller, I, as an athlete, and then in particular as a coach, was always very guilty of playing the matchup game. I would look at the team we're about to play, see their record, who they've played, who they've won, who they've lost against, and then already deciding the outcome of the game in my head before the thing had even played, right? You know, oh, that team's undefeated, we stand no chance. Oh, we beat a team that they lost to, we're gonna crush these guys, it's gonna be no problem whatsoever. And was sometimes rudely surprised, you know, kind of with the outcome.
Right. That's a great, actually that's a great entree into sort of our first topic we're gonna hit on, so thank you for bringing that up. That's a very common thing that we all get into, all of us as human beings do that, and especially athletes, so that's a great point.
I played sports in college as well. I'm now a coach. I feel like a lot of kids feel disappointed. Like, so how can someone overcome the feeling of disappointment during sports or during a practice or during a game? Disappointing a coach, disappointing a parent. That seems to be something a lot of kids feel.
So when things don't go as you had hoped, how do you deal with that disappointment, or actually disappointing a coach?
Yeah, you make a mistake in a game.
Make a mistake.
And you're like, I feel as though this is a lot of pressure and I'm disappointing my team, my coach.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I'm gonna just to give you a kind of a preview, I'm gonna cover about three main topics. And Mr. Momo's point hit on the first one, which is what we call mind chatter, which I'll get into. And your point is dealing with, as the one of my favorite coaches in the world, Sue Enquist, she was the winningest coach in NCAA Women's Division I softball history, and she had three things that were non-negotiables for her players and she had a long career. The first one was 100% effort all the time. The second one was positive attitude on your best days and worst days, and her third one, which touches on your point, which is called mastery of failure recovery, right? So when things don't go as we had hoped, how do we deal with that, right? When we're disappointed, right? When we have a goal of winning or making the shot or whatever. So that's a great point. I'm going to touch on that. Both great points. Yes, go ahead.
I have one. What about, like, everyone stresses on pre-game and pre-practice, like, making sure you're mentally prepared for it. But what about post-game? Is there things that we could be doing after we play and after we're competing against each other to, like, help reset our minds?
That is a great question. Great question. The answer is yes, absolutely. In fact, when I work with golfers, I work with them around, like, just in the sport of golf, the pre-shot routine, and then also I emphasize a post-shot routine, which is exactly what you're talking about. As a team, it's really important, right? Because people have, either they feel great about a win, or they feel sometimes disappointment after a tough loss. And it's really important to do failure recovery, and I'll get into more what that means, but as an individual, but also as a group. So great question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah? Anybody else?
So in like a sport, I mean, I think golf, like when you like say like hit a bad shot and like you're all messed up in the head, is there anything that you can do to really like kind of, do you have any tips to like reset yourself and like move forward and like think about what's coming?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of how I work with athletes, right? In terms of this question of failure recovery. It's not when or if sort of welcome. It's not when or it's not if mistakes or errors will happen in sports, right? It's, they will, right? Even the top athletes. By the way, I saw a commercial the other day, or not a commercial, it was a video clip. Derek Jeter, right? Everybody knows about who Derek Jeter was, shortstop for the New York Yankees, probably one of the most famous shortstops of all time. In his first single A season, rookie ball, he made 56 errors. 56 errors over the course of the season, which was actually a record. He set a record in the Southern Atlantic League, which was the minor league that he was in for the New York Yankees, for errors for a season. So
Like the most?
The most ever in that league, right? He went on to be one of the greatest shortstops of all time. So he had to learn to manage exactly what you're talking about in terms of your talking about golf, but failure recovery. And we have some concrete skills that we can utilize to do that. So, because it's really important. When athletes say, why is failure recovery important? One is because the only moment, a lot of how I work with, I'll get into this, a lot of how I work with athletes is around, part of my training is in mindfulness meditation, staying focused in the present moment, right? If you're, the only shot you can, if you're playing basketball, hockey, field hockey, golf, right? The only play, the only shot is right here in front of you, right? This is why Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, two of the greatest basketball players of all time, worked with George Mumford, who taught them how to meditate. Why is that important? Because we want to come back to the present moment, right? Now, we can't, and if we're stuck in the past, or stuck in the future, or thinking about the future, we're not here. So, really, really important, and that involves failure recovery. Yep. Somebody else had a question?
Yeah, what advice do you have for athletes coming off injuries, especially when they're like healthy enough to play, but like not entirely healthy?
So in terms of, part of what it sounds like you asked the question is like, how do you manage maybe your own anxiety about you have an injured knee? It's almost, you're almost back to 100%, but our brains start to think about that knee when you're running, when you're cutting and so forth, and how do you manage that anxiety around that?
Yeah.
Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. Yeah, that's a big part of, and I'm gonna jump into mind chatter here in a second. It's a big part of mind chatter is our brain starts to crank out. It wants to protect us, so it starts thinking, well, what if you turn your knee, right? This is a natural, if you've been through an injury and surgery and so forth. So that's a great question. Yeah, excellent question. Anybody else? Questions, thoughts? Yeah.
What's like the biggest cause of like burnout you see in sports, and is there anything you can do to like prevent it?
Great question. Yeah, so that's a great question in terms of burnout. Usually burnout is when we feel we lose motivation, we lose interest, we feel tired, fatigued. I mean, you could do a whole talk on burnout, but that's a really important question. Part of the short answer to that is how do we find balance in our lives, right? Not overtraining, taking breaks, having a balance in your life of relationships, rest, fun, things like that. So, great question. Anybody else? Okay, those are, anybody else? Great, those are great questions, and that's really helpful. All those were kind of fit nicely into some of the, I'm gonna hit on about 3 major themes quickly, and then take some questions after that. So, a couple of people talked about this question, Mr. Milmo, you asked the question about, I forgot how you phrased it, but, oh yeah, you're before the game or before you're either looking at the stats for the other team or you're warming. Here's a big one I hear athletes tell me, I feel confident, I'm warming up, and then I see the other team and the other pitcher's throwing 90 miles an hour, or we're playing football and they look huge, and so you start to have these doubts, right? And you start to have these doubts, and our mind starts creating, what I call it, and actually this phrase, just different sports psychology, different things, but this is from Mitchell Green, who's a sports psychologist outside of Philadelphia, called mind chatter. And this has got board chatter, I can tell. So how do I define mind chatter? Mind chatter, because this is actually, most athletes who come to me, this is the primary reason. Because they struggle with things like feeling confident, lacking confidence, or their mind starts to create worry. And so how I define mind chatter is basically these conversations we start to have with ourselves that involve self-doubt, second guessing, and negativity. And most of us, whether in sports or in life, we've had these experiences, right? Where our mind starts to, something happens, and we start to have doubt and negativity. So when does mind chatter usually arise? And I ask athletes, so do you have mind chatter when you're hanging out watching Netflix at home? No. How about if you're going for like a training run? Let's say you're a cross-country runner and you're going for an off-season training run, right? With a good friend. Much mind chatter? No. Why not?
You're not thinking about it. There's no one to compare yourself to.
Exactly, right. So what you all just said is that you're not really thinking about it, right? There's two conditions whereby mind chatter arises, and you guys just touched on them. The first one is mind chatter usually arises when the stakes are high, right? So when you're going out for a training run with a friend in the summer, what are the stakes? Not that high, right? When you're watching Netflix, I mean, maybe movie might make you nervous or whatever, but stakes are pretty low. If you're in a basketball game and there's 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and your team is winning 40-10, and you're bringing the ball up, is there much mind chatter? Probably not, right? Now, if you're the backup quarterback and you're in the EIL championship game, and the starting quarterback unfortunately gets injured, turns their ankle, and coach says you're in a tie game fourth quarter, do you think there might be a little mind chatter? Why? Because the stakes are high and the outcome is uncertain, right? Now the next question is, why do we have mind chatter? Right? Why does our mind create this mind chatter? The reason is because we have these brains and nervous systems, and I don't just talk about when I work with people, I don't just talk about our brain, because we have a brain and a nervous system that's basically hardwired to detect threat, right? The brain's first job is to keep us safe, okay? What does that mean? Well, for instance, if you go out for a hike in the Maine woods and a bear starts coming after you, your nervous system is going to protect you by running away, right? Or you're in a busy, let's say you're in New York City and you step off the curb and a big truck is coming at you, your nervous system is going to alert you, right? It's called fight. Have everyone heard of fight, flight, freeze before? Right, that's what we're hardwired to do. So our nervous systems and brains don't just detect physical threat, but they also detect psychological threat. What does that mean? Well, the quarterback who's going in the fourth quarter like that, right? Or let's say you're in a big race, or you want to make it to Division I sports, and you're at a tryout, right? Or you know that there's a scout from a college who's going to be watching your game. Our brains know that there's a higher level, more at stake there, right? So our brains start to crank out these concerns, worries, fears, doubts, kind of like Mr. Milmo mentioned, right? What if this happens? What if that happens? That's I tell athletes, because athletes will come to me and they'll say, I'm having these doubts and fears. Does that mean I'm not going to perform well? Is there something wrong with me, right? I tell them, no, there's nothing wrong with you. That's kind of what our brains do, right? Our brains just create thoughts. They kind of pump out all these thoughts, these dramas all day long, right? A meditation teacher once said to me, do you think you can control your thoughts? And he said, well, if you think you can, sit there for about 2 minutes and try to keep your attention on your breath. You'll see that your brain just creates thoughts, right? It's hard to control our thoughts. So when we're dealing with mind chatter, we don't want to fight against the mind chatter. Anybody have an idea? Because sometimes people say to me, my coach told me and my parents told me I should just think positive, just be positive all the time, right? Just be confident. But when you're in a stressful situation as an athlete, you may not feel confident, right? Right? So what do we do then, right? What do we do when we don't necessarily feel confident? What we can do is what I tell athletes, you can sort of have concrete action goals, right? When we try to do battle with our thoughts, what happens? If you try to fight against your thoughts, right? If you're really feeling anxious or nervous and you say, just think positive, just think positive. The problem is, and athletes come to me, they say, I tried that, but the problem is when I'm feeling really nervous or when the stakes are high and that outcome is really uncertain, and I try to sort of do battle with my thoughts or just think positive, I end up feeling like I'm not doing good at that now. So I feel like I'm actually failing at something else. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Is that sort of clear what I'm saying? Okay, this is kind of a hard thing to get, but it's really important in dealing with mind chatter. So what I tell athletes is, we don't want to fight against our mind chatter, but maybe this is a better example. So this is one I often use with athletes. Let's say you're in a softball or baseball game and you're up to bat, and you struck out twice earlier in the game. You're coming up and an athlete, let's say a player from the opposing dugout, starts chirping. They're going to strike out, right? They've already struck out twice. What would you do as an athlete, as a hitter, right? Well, what you probably wouldn't do is turn and start having an argument with this person, right? You would probably just ignore it. Hopefully they wouldn't do that, but sometimes they do. The problem is we can ignore that, but oftentimes we start listening to the voices in our own heads. Like you mentioned, Mr. Momo, about that voice that says, what if this, what if that? What do we do, right? We grab onto that voice and we end up having a half-hour conversation with ourselves, right? What's the problem with that? Any ideas? When we engage in that conversation with that voice in our head? Well, the problem is that it takes us out of the present moment, right? And it distracts us. When we start to do battle with those thoughts, we lose focus and we don't focus on the most important thing, which is this very moment right here, right? This next play, this next shot. So we don't want to fight against the mind chatter, but what we actually want to do is focus on concrete action goals. So what does that mean? That means, and this is we could spend a couple hours on this, but what that means is really coming up with one or two concrete things, actions you can do. So if you're a golfer, for instance, and to your question, when maybe you're struggling, maybe you made a few bogeys, right? And you're struggling and you feel like your mind starts to create this mind chatter. Like in golf, for instance, the mind chatter often is, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? Am I gonna not shoot well today, play well today? What we can do is we can bring our attention back to one or two concrete action goals. So for a golfer, that might be staying balanced on their feet, or in field hockey, right? Staying balanced on your feet, practicing your shot, feeling the stick in your hands in hockey. So those are kind of suggestions that you can do for how to work with mind chatter. Any questions about mind chatter? And I know I kind of sped through, that's a huge topic, but any questions about mind chatter in particular, Mr. Momo?
I'm curious about more of the kind of concrete goals where you sort of said like, focus on your hands,
Yep.
focus on your breath. I remember hearing a Major League Baseball player say that every time he got up to bat, the way he quieted his mind was he would stare at the foul pole before he stepped in the box.
Yep.
Do you have any other kind of concrete examples like that?
Yeah, and it's really sport specific. But one of the, I don't know if did anybody watch the World Series last night? So if you notice Tyler Glasnow, the starting pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, when he was warming up in the bullpen, he was doing breath work, right? He was taking slow breaths and he was extending his out breath. When you do that brings a sense of calm to your nervous system. So awareness of breath is something I teach athletes a lot. It is something that I would encourage all of you to practice. When your breath is something that can center you in the present moment, and it can also be a place to park your attention. The goal of action goals, whatever it is, when I work with athletes, I tell them you need to figure that out for yourself, what they are. But for instance, for a hockey player, it might be feeling themselves balanced on their skates, or feeling the stick in their hands, right? For a golfer, it might be focusing on a follow through. We just want one or two things that are a place to park your attention, right? So writing down concrete goals, so you can think about when you leave today and you go back to your practicing tomorrow, write down one or two concrete goals that you can use that are relevant to your sport. That when you start to have mind chatter or worry, you can, really this is a place to redirect your attention, to anchor your attention. So that's kind of, yeah. Failure recovery. Failure recovery. So that was a theme that several people brought up, and it's really important. How do we bring our attention back to the present moment after we failed? You mentioned Roger Federer, right? That failure happens in sports. Scotty Scheffler, who's one of the probably top male golfer in the world, his ratio of birdies after bogeys is the highest on the PGA Tour. So he's mastered this art of coming back to the present moment, right? So in terms of failure recovery, why is that important? One, because we want to stay in the present moment, but it gives us an edge over our opponents, right? Because while our opponent may be focused on what happened on the other end of the court, or the other end of the field, or the other end of the ice, right? Being able to return to the present moment gives us an edge. So what's a concrete skill how we can do that? And I tell this to coaches too when I work with coaches. Sue Enquist, who's the softball coach I mentioned, she actually would have a station in practice focused on failure recovery. So practicing when let's say an outfielder would drop a ball, right, or make an error. After the error, the outfielder would look to the other outfielders, hit their mitt, and the other outfielders would tell them how many outs there was. Why did they do that? Because it helped them to come back to the present moment, right? Again, how do we sort of say, there's an acronym that I use with athletes, it's called RALF. It's from Dean Smith, who's a basketball coach in North Carolina. And this is a concrete, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning, when I talk about these skills, these are not just for sports, but they're really good that you can practice in life too, right? So failure recovery is important if you get a low grade on a quiz or a test, or you have a difficult job interview or something in business, right? It's something you can practice all the time. So RALF means when you make a mistake or an error, recognize it, acknowledge it. So we don't want to dismiss it, right? We want to recognize it, we want to acknowledge it, we want to learn from it, right? Now maybe if you're on the ice or on the soccer pitch in the middle of the game, you can't learn from it right there, but when you come back, like in baseball, in between, or softball, in between pitches, or in golf when you're walking on the fairway, how do you learn from it, right? We want to meet mistakes with curiosity versus judgment, right? So we can learn from it. And then you want to forget it. Why? Because we don't want to be hanging on to what just happened 5 minutes, just like the quote from Roger Federer. So again, this is something you can practice failure recovery. It's more of a mindset, right? How do we let go of what just happened? You'd asked to say a few words about leadership, and I know we're kind of around time, but though I guess what I would say about, and again, you could do a whole workshop on leadership, but those of you who are captains, those of you who are coaches, that in terms of, we really want to role model things like good failure recovery, being positive. I mean, a big part of leadership is just modeling things like how we treat one another, right? Being positive. So that's kind of, I mean, that's a brief kind of overview of leadership, but yeah. Just a few kind of overarching themes too that I tell athletes is, there's kind of a theme that runs through all these things is controlling the controllables, right? There's a lot of things when you're playing sports, there's a lot of things that you can't control, right? We can't control the refs, we can't control the umpires, we can't control the conditions on the field, we can't control the quality of the competition, right? So when we try to focus in what I mentioned about mind chatter really wants us to go, the reason why mind chatter is not helpful is mind chatter is often focused on things in the future, right? What will my friends think when we post our running times on social media, right? What if we don't win, right? We want to focus on concrete skills, and that's why I mentioned action goals, like each play, right? Each shot in the present moment. So that's something we can control, right? If we could control whether we win or not, we would win every time, right? If we could control whether or not we got 4 hits in every game, we would get 4 hits, right? So we really want to focus on what we can control. One thing I want to emphasize too is that just as if you're going to be good at field hockey, football, softball, what do we need to do? You need to practice golf. You need to practice the skills, right? The physical skills. That's what practice is. What I would suggest to you is that if you're going to be good at the mental side of the game, you need to work on these skills, right? So things like, one place to start is, I teach every athlete I work with, and we didn't get a chance to do it tonight, but I was going to do some breath work. When you can just simply, like I mentioned Tyler Glasnow, breathing, simple skill you can take with you to help you stay in the present moment is awareness of breath, AOB, okay? When you breathe in through your nose on a count of 2 and out on a count of, out through your mouth, through pursed lips on a count of 4, it's called extending the out breath. You lower your blood pressure, you help relax your muscles, and you also give yourself a place to anchor your attention. So if there's one skill I would encourage you to do, there's a reason why you see professional athletes doing this all the time, right? It's one way to, it helps to balance that fight, flight, freeze response. So, but yeah, there's just the importance of, you have to put in the work. So, yeah. Just a few questions. I know we just tried to pack a lot in there, but any questions about what I've said or questions you may have, Mr. Millman?
So something I definitely see our coaches doing all the time, right, is trying to minimize the uncontrollable, right? You know, and building routine, right, into what is our pregame warm up, right? We're going to be consistent kind of with doing that. We're getting ready to have a whole host of senior days on Saturday, where here I come in as the athletic director and disrupt routine. Right. And so when routine gets disrupted, what would your advice be to these athletes, right? Typically they've got their standard pregame warm up, and now I'm going to be coming in. I'm bringing their parents. I'm bringing their friends. They're walking out. I'm on the microphone. And so it's a different environment than what they're used to.
Yep.
How do you regain that focus when you've lost your routine?
Yeah, I think part of it is, again, coming back to the present moment, right? And this is where mindfulness meditation practice is really important, is that whatever's happening, how can you be right here, right? And these are things you have to work on, but if we say I'm only going to perform well if I have my whole routine, right? Then we're sort of trying to hold on to something we can't control, right? So it's a good question for you. I mean, it's a good question to bring up, right? That sometimes it's again, let's say we get on the field and the field's muddy and we have the wrong cleats on, right? How do we refocus and try to be with what is? Great question. Any other questions at all?
Do you have any good book recommendations for athletes?
Sure. Yep.
Or a podcast or something like that?
One of my favorites in terms of is Michael Gervais' Finding Mastery. He's a sports psychologist. He worked with the Seattle Seahawks and with NFL. Golfers, the Par Train is a good one. Books. One of the way I work with a lot of athletes around mindfulness practice. It's the centerpiece of how I work. So George Mumford, who worked with, he won it's about 8, I guess it was 6 or 7 championships with the Lakers and the Bulls, late 90s, teaching them meditation, mindfulness. He wrote a book called The Mindful Athlete. It's really good. Mitch Green, who's a lot of my work is based on, outside of Philadelphia, he wrote a book called Courage Over Confidence. Gets into mind chatter, things like that. So it's a really good book with some concrete skills. Yeah. So.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Any other questions at all? Thoughts? Yeah.
I kept talking about like fight, flight, or freeze.
Sure.
And like breathwork. Do you think that like before I go out and race,
Yep.
it's healthy for me to have that? Because I feel I get very stressed out before.
Yep.
Do you think it's and I try to minimize that? Do you think it's okay to have some of that? It's gonna be helpful, or do we want to get rid of a lot of that?
You mean to have kind of like
Stress,
yeah.
worry.
Yeah, the way I work with this around athletes, and I apologize, I sort of covered mind chatter really quickly, but that's a great question, right? Because what I first tell athletes is it's normal, it's what our brains do. That when we sense that the stakes are high and the outcome's uncertain, our brains start to, our nervous systems, right? Our heart rate can increase, right? I mentioned Michaela Schifrin, I think I mentioned, if I didn't, she's one of the greatest skiers, female skiers of all time. She had a whole season where she would actually have panic attacks in the starting blocks because she was so anxious and nervous, right? Just what you're talking about. She had to find ways of dealing with that. What we don't want to do is fight against it. We want to acknowledge it. It says, okay, but create some space for it, right? And then park our attention elsewhere. So let's say you're getting ready for a race and your heart rate starts to increase, you start to feel, and by the way, all athletes at all levels have experienced this, right? What we want to do is acknowledge it, create some space for it, right? But then focus on some concrete action goals. That's where action goals are important. So as a runner, whatever that is for you, it might be focusing on your breath, focus on your stride, right? A lot of athletes, I tell athletes this all the time. Just because you have mind chatter doesn't mean you can't perform well. Just because you have mind chatter doesn't mean that you're mentally weak. Because that's what something people worry about, right? I have mind chatter, I must be mentally weak. No, this is just how our brains and nervous systems were evolved, right? Because when the stakes are high and the outcome is uncertain, it detects threat, right? So we don't want to fight against it because then we've lost our focus. If we're fighting against it, that's like the person up to bat and they're arguing with this person in the dugout, right? We want to redirect our attention to the moment. That's why action goals are so important. So great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's one of the first guys who coaches who was at San Jose State in the 70s worked on breath work with runners. So there's a lot of you can find out there written on that. Great question. Yeah. Anybody else? Sure.
You said that the skier had like panic attacks when she was in like the box to start. Do you have any like tips for dealing with panic attacks?
Sure. Yeah. One thing I tell people when dealing with panic anxiety, and panic attack is just another form of anxiety. we're hardwired, part of how we're hardwired is we experience anxiety. If we didn't have anxiety as human beings, we wouldn't have survived as a species, right? Our brain's first job is to protect us. So when you're experiencing anxiety or a panic attack, one of the things we don't want to do is to try to fight against it, right? Or to catastrophize, to sort of think, oh my gosh, something bad's going to happen. The best way to work, and this is a sort of a, you spend a lot of time in this question, but in short, I would say we want to try to regulate your nervous system. And the extending the out breath that I mentioned to you, and I was going to do that actually, we get a chance to do it, but basically it's like this. And you can do this, I recommend doing this before games, during games, after games, all the time. You can breathe in through your nose on a count of 2, or whatever count will work for you. The important thing is then the out breath through pursed lips on a count of 3 or 4. And when you do that, there's these little baroreceptors in your carotid arteries right here that lowers your blood pressure, lowers your heart rate. It's kind of like, because when you're having a panic attack, your autonomic, your nervous system is kind of feels out of control, right? So that's one, it's kind of like nature's hack that's given us to help to activate our, what we call our parasympathetic, which is like the brake on that. So not going to worst case scenario with your thoughts, but also regulating your body through your breathing is one of the best ways that I work with people around panic attacks. Great question. Anybody else? Well, thank you all so much for, is there anything else you wanted to bring up at all?
Not at all, Dr. Zeller. This was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out tonight, and I realize that we tried to pack a lot in, but I have some cards and also rack cards. So I have a website, zellerpsychology.com, and I also have a blog on there which touches on some of the things you talked about and other information. So if that's useful, feel free to grab a card or visit my website. Or if you ever have any other follow-up questions, feel free to. Mr. Milmo knows where to reach me. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.